Rejoice, for once more it is your favorite time of the week. It's Magic Morning Wood. People look forward to this, Ron. You know that, right?
Do they?
Yeah.
Who are they?
So anyway, I'm Clive, and he is
Ron.
right.
Yes.
There we got that sorted.
How's it going, Clive?
How's it going, Ron?
You got to have the best part of the show. How's it going?
Good, good. You?
Good, good.
There we
Good.
go. Excellent.
All right.
So, yes, talking films as usual. Algorithm machine on, responding to the last thing we spoke about was
Traveling executioner?
the traveling executioner. Yes, so we are responding to that, and we both responded the same way, it turns out. So
Yeah.
today is a Stacy Keach-a-thon.
Whoa.
Yeah, a Stacy
Song.
Keach double bill.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, so I went for the 1977 British crime film The Squeeze, uh, as directed by Michael Abted, script by Leon Griffiths, based on the novel by Jim, what's his name? Jim something, I forget his real
Tucker.
name.
James Tucker. James
Yes,
Tucker.
writing as David Craig, right? Um, and this was a film I had not seen before. I don't suppose you'd seen it, had you, Ron? By any
Nope.
chance? No? Okay. One I was keen to see. I'd heard kind of interesting things about it, so I thought this would be the opportunity to check it out. Plot is as follows. Stacy Keach plays a kind of, I think he's a former Scotland Yard detective and degenerate alcoholic, right? Basically.
Well, former detective, but current alcoholic, I guess, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. And so they don't spell it out exactly, but I think it's his, is it ex his ex-wife
Yes,
is
I believe, yeah, again, it wasn't really spelled out, but I believe it was his ex-wife who's now remarried with a daughter, and I think the daughter is not his.
right. He has another
Yeah,
child, isn't he?
he
With
has a different child. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So yeah, so
But
his
his
his ex,
ex-wife, who's remarried with and now has a daughter with the new husband. Yeah,
yes, and the other husband, Edward Fox, um, comes to him after the wife and daughter are kidnapped,
mm.
and because he works for some sort of security firm or something, right?
Mm. Yeah,
So it turns out eventually, because we're not really told what's going on until kind of towards the end, that basically what they need from him is to make sure that he kind of runs interference, I suppose, during a armored car robbery.
mm.
I think that's kind of the ins and outs of it, right?
Right.
And then Stacy Keach kind of starts poking his nose in as soon as he's told, and then that tips off the gangsters that someone might be on to them. So it's all kind of quite convoluted,
Mm.
but that's kind of the basic through line. Um, and I suppose what's kind of notable about the film, I suppose, is an almost entire lack of any sympathetic character of any kind.
Yeah, that's true.
Um,
Even well, maybe the daughter. That's what yeah, even the wife is not really that sympathetic either.
no,
Yeah,
no, it's
yeah,
it's it's kind of it almost goes out of its way to
yeah.
just show everyone as kind of horrible and debased and selfish
Mm.
and the criminals in it like are really kind of scuzzy and
Mm.
sleazy and unnecessarily violent and
Yeah.
nasty to there's like a there's like a scene involving a dog being thrown out of a car, right, dressed as
Mm.
a small child, which is quite
Okay.
unpleasant.
Mm.
And then yeah, when the wife is being held captive, they force her to do this strip as well, which is just like extremely unsavory and not at all titillating, or it's just, yeah, it's all quite grim, which is, I suppose, something I quite appreciate about this film, that they did really make it quite,
They went for
yeah,
it.
yeah. um it's all that said, though, it's not, for me as well. I'll ask what you think in a minute, but it doesn't totally work, right?
Yeah, I don't think
Doesn't
so.
totally work at all, especially towards the end, when the kind of the robbery section, and it turns into a bit more of an action movie. It seems
Mm,
slightly more ludicrous at that point. There's
yeah.
like a cumulative ludicrousness about it, and
Mm,
when you have the shootout in the street, you're thinking, hang on, this has gone from kind of somewhat realistic to a bit silly, maybe.
yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it's quite meandering, and
Yes.
yeah, but
Goes
it's
against.
because it's strange. That's, on the one hand, that's what its strength for me. What I like about it is the fact that it goes off into all these different tangents, and you see everyone at their worst and doing horrible things and stuff. That's like, on the one hand, that's good. I like that. That's part of what makes it unique. But on
Mm.
the other hand, it also robs the film of a kind of momentum, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, so
Yeah.
definitely.
So it's a yeah, I suppose the phrase is it's a curate's egg, right? It's yeah, it's an odd one. I'm glad I watched it. I can see why it does have a little bit of a cult following, but yeah, so definitely worth a watch for sure.
Mm.
But it's not exactly, because heard some people compare it to things like Long Good Friday and stuff, which we watched for this, but it's nowhere near as, because that's a proper kind of propulsive
Mm.
narrative as well. All this is like a classic gangster film. This is not that by some margin, but it definitely is. It does have a unsavory flavor
Mm.
all its own. What did you make of The Squeeze, Ron?
Yeah, I think yeah, as you said, unsavory. Like when you finish it, like makes you want to like take a shower. Like you feel like kind
Yeah.
of dirty after you're watching it and stuff like that. Yeah, I agree with most of what you said. That it was, yeah, it was, had moments of kind of real interest and kind of, and I'm glad it didn't kind of pull its punches. But I would add one more element, which is that not only was it really grim and kind of dark and gritty, it was also similar to the Traveling Executioner, tonally kind of all over the place.
Mm.
There was at moments like which was almost farcical,
Yes,
where on
true. Yeah.
purpose, right? Like right at the very beginning, he gets out of prison. Stacey Keach's character gets out of prison and gets picked up by his buddy, and they meet, and they're walking down the street, and like literally, or no, he's not. Sorry, not out of prison. He gets out of the
Yes.
rehab center, right? And he's like, they cross the street, and like literally, his friend's walking with him, and his friend keeps walking. He turns and goes into the bar, right?
Wah,
Which
wah,
was like
wah.
a
Yeah, yeah.
wah wah wah, like it's like a yeah, it was like a joke. It was meant to be a joke, or it was meant to be
Yes.
like farcical, sort of farcically funny, but it was just felt those types of element, and there was a few of those examples which were real, like kind of like just fell out of place in this movie. Like it was just, they were just felt shoehorned in, and made, I think, overall took away from the overall package of the movie. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So
Yeah.
I think, so rather than, I mean, if you're going to go dark, just go dark. Don't worry about this, like, comic relief nonsense moments, and
Right.
also, yeah, and yeah, again, same with the meandering, like, the wife and the daughter are kidnapped and they don't know where they are, and there's like these really bad guys, and then he just goes out and like these benders, and you're just kind of following him on these benders, and it's just like, okay, well, where's this going? And it doesn't really ever go anywhere, right? So, which is fine, and if it's earned, but it didn't really feel earned sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the benders, the bender scenes, I didn't mind them so much, because I think but I agree with you. They didn't necessarily pull it off exactly, but I think maybe what they were going for was that this is an extremely compromised anti-hero, and rather
Mm.
than dive straight into action. He kind of wants to, but he's massively compromised by the fact that he suddenly has to go out and there's like a scene where he has to track his friend has to track him down and he's hanging out with homeless people and like so
Yeah.
I kind of get what they were trying to do. Like they were trying to make him a very complex and true, I suppose, authentic to a certain extent, that someone with those addiction issues would
Sure.
suddenly just clean up and become Superman, right? They would have
Right.
to, yeah. But yes, I agree with you. It's it does seem
But
sometimes.
at the same time, yeah, maybe he wouldn't clean up and become Superman, but he, and he's still wrestling with his demons, but at the same time, showing that and into the depth that it did took away from the tension of the family being kidnapped. You know what I mean? Like it's because it seemed almost like he didn't really care that much because he's got this other stuff to do, and so it felt
Yeah,
the audience lost the tension as well, right? So I think overall it took away from that kind of thing. Like
yeah,
I didn't feel like, oh, what's going to happen? Are they going to, are they going to end up killing them in the end? Like there was none of that. It was just sort of like I didn't really care. Well, as well, I mean, the wife herself is not that
right.
wasn't a very likable character either. So you almost didn't really care what happened to anybody in this film.
Yeah,
So
I couldn't put my finger on the intent of, because if that was the intent, and that could be the intent, that could be because almost like the way the Stacy Keach character behaves is like he's like a man who's kind of given up on doing good because like what's the
right,
fucking point kind of thing,
right,
because there's just so much darkness in the world. Why bother? And he's
yeah.
okay, fuck it, I have to. So that may have been the intent, um, and therefore the film. But I do feel, yes, I think they were trying to make an exciting thriller as well, right? The way
Yes.
the music and stuff like that. So I don't think they were going for that exclusively, and so they might have fumbled the
Yeah.
ball a little bit on the.
Yeah, I think there's two ways they could have gone. They could have gone just like character study, or they could have gone, thrilling, or thriller, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Thriller and suspenseful, whatever. But they kind of tried to mush them together, and then because of that, it became sort of like was not equal to the sum of its parts. You know what I mean? It ended up being kind of like it
right.
it watered down both of those elements by including them both in there, right?
Right,
So
right.
yeah, so
Would
it's
you agree it's
yeah,
still worth a look, though? It's kind of an
yeah,
interesting
it
one.
had its moments. It was interesting. Yeah. So, but yeah, overall, I think it was not entirely successful, but yeah, it
Yeah,
was
no,
okay.
I found it a quite an interesting watch,
Hmm.
just to kind of consider what they were trying to do exactly, and I certainly didn't find it boring. And
Hmm.
Stacey Keach was really good. It's interesting as well to consider that kind of split personality. So the director of this, Michael Apted, British director, who his career actually is maybe a slight example of this kind of weird dichotomy, right? Because so he's directed hits like Coal Miner's Daughter and Gorky Park, the Richard Pryor film Critical Condition, that was him. Gorillas in the Mist.
Hmm.
He's made these proper big movies, but I think probably what he's most remembered for, at least in the UK nowadays, because he passed a few years ago. But are you familiar with the Seven Up series of documentary films? So these are like really famous in the UK. These started in 1963, where Michael Apted did this documentary for television where he basically interviewed a bunch of 7-year-old children, just asking them questions about their lives and what they wanted for the future and just stuff like that. And then they would return to the same people every 7 years.
Oh,
So I
okay,
think
yeah.
the last one he did was in 2019 when they were all 63 years old. So he saw these
Okay.
kids grow up, so it's
Hmm.
kind of a
Okay.
fascinating experiment. Uh,
Oh,
and as the series continued, some of them like dropped out and
hmm.
didn't want to take part anymore, but they'd say what they'd been up to. And if you ever have a chance to kind of watch them in sequence, it's really quite interesting to see. It's like a state of the nation kind of thing. So Michael Apted is, I think, most famous for doing the Seven Up
Hmm.
series, which are quite interesting.
It's a show or
They were like a one-off documentary.
One-off specials
Yeah, one
every
every 7 years.
7 years.
They were like an hour and a half or something.
How
Yeah.
many of them are there total? Like
Well, the last one he did was
nine, I guess.
60,
So
uh,
there were nine, right?
well,
No,
eight. Big, yeah,
eight, right? Yeah,
yeah,
because they started
yeah,
at seven, right? Yeah. So
yeah.
okay.
So,
Mm.
yeah, I do wonder actually if anyone's going to pick up the baton, and so the next one is due if they're going to do one in 2026, right? So I'm wondering if anyone is going to carry on where Michael Apted left off, or if it would be difficult to, because obviously those interview subjects and the director had a rapport, right, after all those years
Yeah,
together.
sure.
So yeah, I don't know if they're planning to continue because they didn't all die at 63, right? So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they continue with it.
Mm.
Um, yeah, David Hemmings, who Unman, Wittering, and Zygo, we saw him in. Did you notice Alan Ford of Bricktop from Snatch and Long Good Friday fame?
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he was in it with his very distinctive, slightly scary face and what is this scary looking man, Alan Ford is.
Yeah.
And so what probably you wouldn't have, I'm guessing you wouldn't have picked up on is the casting of so the character who plays the taxi driver who
Okay.
befriends Stacy Keach. He's Freddie Starr. He's a really, really, really famous stand-up comedian.
Okay. No, I didn't
Yeah.
get that.
No, I didn't think because you wouldn't guess from this that he was a comedian, right? He's not really.
So why did they choose him for that
I don't
part?
know. I was actually quite surprised. I didn't know he was in it, and I watched the film, and then they said, "And Freddie Starr." I thought, oh, or maybe he has a cameo or something,
Mm.
or like he'll be in a stage in like a working men's club, or because he's very much that kind of comedian. Although he was famous for being like a little bit for mainstream comedy, he was considered like a little bit of a wild cat.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
but he was present throughout my childhood. I didn't expect him to actually be kind of one of the leads or co-leads of the film,
Mm.
and played it straight as well. I was kind of
Mm.
surprised. That would be one of the things that would jump out for a British audience. I think would be
Mm.
Freddie Starr. It would be like I don't know. It would be like suddenly watching a film and Rick Moranis or something is like a tough cop or something like that. Or I don't know. Rick Moranis was a stand-up.
No, he was SCTV. He was a sketch comedy.
Okay, yeah, I think a stand-up, a Canuck stand-up. Who's a Canuck stand-up? Who you would be surprised to see
Who's what did you say? A what stand-up?
a Canuck stand-up? Isn't that the
Panic.
yeah, as in Canadian?
Oh, Canuck.
A Canuck. Oh, all right.
Canuck.
I was putting
Oh,
the
like panic. What's
emphasis.
a panic? Put the stress on the wrong word.
Yeah.
On the syllable. Panic. A Canuck. Yeah, Canuck. A Canuck stand-up. I don't know any. I can't think of any particular Canuck stand-ups. Most comedians go into sketch or and or just film or acting, right? So there's
Oh,
not a
okay.
lot of yeah. there are some. I mean, like Jim Carrey, but
Right. Is there a stand-up circuit though in
yeah, yeah. Of course there is. Yeah, but
right?
like there's not like people who are famous for being you know, most Canadian comedians who become famous aren't really famous for their stand up. They become famous because they go into other stuff. You know what I mean? Like there's Jim Carrey, for example, who's Canadian, but
Hmm.
Jim Carrey started in stand up, but then became famous for other stuff, right? So obviously, and he's not really an example for this because he also has done,
Yeah, he later became
like
a
became a serious
serious.
actor, right? So, so that's so that's the example. So,
All right.
but anyway, yeah. So
Um,
yeah,
yeah, I'm just trying to think. Anything else? No, I think that's about it's about it. It's funny I mentioned the music. It does have this kind of music by David Henschel, who was a producer of Genesis, I think.
Hmm.
And that reminded me a little bit of we talked about in the Long Good Friday as well. That kind of which is a couple of years after this or 3 years after this, but that kind of it gives it a slightly different vibe
Hmm.
from your usual British crime movie. It's got that slightly glitzy, glamoury, kind of more Euro American kind of thing to it, right? I thought that was kind of interestingly comparable to what they were doing in the Long Good Friday.
Quick question, like I read uh the Wikipedia synopsis of this movie.
Okay.
Because sometimes I do that, especially if there things tend to be convoluted. I read that to see if maybe if there's something I missed or something, there's a connection that I didn't pick up on. And
Uh,
it said that it's implied at the end, which I didn't necessarily get, but I guess once I saw that I could see it, that the husband was involved with the kidnapping.
oh, oh, that's
Yeah. So
interesting.
same thing, right? So I had the same reaction. I
Yeah,
was like, oh, I didn't even really think about that. But
but
apparently,
looking
according to
at,
that, it says it is kind of implied that maybe he was actually
interesting.
involved with the whole thing.
It certainly would fit the
Yeah,
overall
and it
grim
would. Yeah.
tone,
So
wouldn't it?
so
Yeah.
I thought it bore mentioning just because I thought it was something that I didn't think about when I saw it, and
Oh,
obviously you didn't either. But it does make sense, right?
yeah.
So
No, I'm going to make note of that because I'll probably watch this again at some point, not straight away, but I can see myself watching this again one day, and I'll watch very closely to see if they do
hmm,
maybe give a clue.
right.
That's interesting. Another thing to look out for as well, apparently, I didn't notice this, but apparently Steve Jones of the Sex Pistols.
Yeah, it was in the back of a market. Yeah,
Yeah.
market. Yeah,
Like,
scene or something. So yeah,
I mean, I
accidental.
wouldn't know what he looked like, but I didn't. I'm
Yeah.
guessing it's just a head round the corner or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I
apparently,
don't know.
Paul Cook saw it. I guess
Yeah,
he must have seen it in the theater or something because it
yeah,
was
and then
bigger.
just like, hey, you're in this movie.
Look, Steve's in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, we forgot to mention as well. It does have a definite edge of black humor to it as well. I feel
Mm.
it's quite funny.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing I was saying is that it's really trying to be black, using lots of black humor, but at the same time, it sort of was uneven. It wasn't fully black humor, and then it would just go just dark, and then they would try to bring in black humor, but I was like, it didn't really
Yeah.
work. You know what I mean? So
There
yeah,
was a few bit. There was one bit where just after the kid finds out that the dog's been killed and pushed out the car or whatever, and there's like one of the kidnappers is just in the background and like I don't know trying to empathize or something, and he's just going, "I had a dog myself once," and it just it's like, that's not really
yeah,
helping. I thought that was quite funny.
they're there,
Yeah, yeah.
they're there.
So yeah, there we go. Not entirely successful, but certainly not without interest.
Merit, yeah.
Uh, Okie doke. So that was my Stacy Keach selection. And how about you, Ron? What did you go for?
And so I decided, because I was surprised that we've never done one of these to date over the years we've done this podcast. So I thought it was time that we checked in with Cheech and Chong and did the OG stoner comedy,
Hmm.
uh Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke.
Right.
Um, yeah, so
78, right?
1978,
Yeah.
huh?
78. 78, right?
78, yeah, 1978, starring Cheech and Chong, Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong, who went on to, I don't know, how many Cheech and Chong movies were there? I didn't even look.
Ooh, there's at least off the
Four or
top
five.
of my I can think of five off the top of my head. And then there's other ones like which is either one or the like, but I can't. Some of them make a cameo, and it's like what's that one? Born in East LA or something like that. Is that a cheat?
Oh, yeah.
That's just one of them, or
Yeah, that's just Cheech, I think.
I've never
Yeah.
seen them.
Yeah, Cheech tended to do more, I think, more than Chong ever did.
Yes, yeah. For
Yeah,
instance, he's the guy in From Dusk Till Dawn, right?
Crystal Dawn.
Yeah,
Yeah. That
yes.
pussy,
Yeah,
pussy,
yeah, yeah.
pussy.
You
Yeah. So
buy
yeah.
better pussy anyone else? Fuck you.
Yeah. But then yeah, I think so I think Cheech had more acting roles in general, but yeah, I think they both had their own stuff going on. Uh Tommy Chong was famously a recurring character in that 70s show. So
Ah, okay, okay. Also,
so
the father of Ray Dawnchong.
oh yes, yeah, from Commando, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, this was I guess they had been, but of course they were also a stand-up duo, or they stand up with it. I don't know if they did stand up, but they did
Oh,
comedy records, I guess, right?
yes.
Yeah,
Yes. So
so I don't know if
by the time this film came along, I think they'd already been
established as
stars of
comedians, right?
It's funny now. I think it's a moment in time that we overlook because it's a little bit before our time, right?
Hmm.
The comedy record, and especially the underground comedy. Like a lot of these
Yeah.
people, that's what they were known for. Richard Pryor would have, become famous originally from his records
Yeah,
and stuff,
yeah,
right? Um,
yeah.
yeah, and then I guess they figured, oh, let's turn this into a movie. Let's cash in on our stoner
Right.
personas, which I've always been massively suspicious about, only to the extent that I don't think you can, I don't think you can get this successful being as stoned as they pretend they are.
Well, I'm sure that there's an element of it. I always like when watching this movie and seeing them in general, I always thought it would be hilarious if like near the end of their life they came out and said like actually we've never done drugs in our life,
I would
like
not be surprised because
I think that would be great. That'd be a great one to end it on, right?
you've
So
got to get your shit together to because he wrote the movie and he's not credited, but Tommy Chong co-directed it with Lou
hmm,
Adler, right? He's the like
right.
the guy behind this. Yeah, no, I've always been ever so slightly suspicious that they might actually be super professional teetotalers.
Yeah, well, I mean, considering they've had like lifelong careers,
Exactly.
I mean, they obviously are not just stoners because otherwise they would never get off the couch to do anything, right? So,
And I know there are functional stoners, but fucking
yeah,
hell, this is yeah. I've known a few stoners in my time, and they can barely get it together to make a cup of tea or order a
sure, yeah,
pizza, right? As
yeah,
opposed to
yeah. So,
direct a movie. Right?
yeah, but yeah, I'm sure it's there's an element of exaggeration
Oh yeah,
for them, right? But yeah, yeah. Um, So yeah, so of course this is basically spawned a whole genre of comedy movies, the stoner comedy, which is now like for Seth Rogen um people of his ilk, like those people. There's been a lot of like the Pineapple Express and like a lot of those kind of things. So it's kind of become a genre of its own. But this was really the original, I guess, stoner comedy. I guess
yeah, I
I
think
can't.
so. And
Yeah,
still kind of the best as well. I think really. Had you seen
yeah,
it
I'd
before? By
say
the way,
yeah.
had you seen it before?
Yeah, yeah, I'd seen it like long, like when I was a kid, I think, right? So I
Yeah.
mean, of course, I didn't really get most of the jokes at the time, right? So I think this
Yeah,
was,
well, that's the thing.
yeah,
I think so. I think the reason maybe Up in Smoke still is held up as because when you ever look up those lists like best stoner comedies or whatever, it's always near the top, right?
yeah,
And we'll get to what we made of it this time. But certainly I think the first time I saw Up in Smoke was before I'd ever been stoned. I think,
mm,
uh, but it still seemed to work as a comedy regardless of
sure,
whereas I
yeah,
think the idea with stoner comedies, other ones are there's a certain element where you have to be able to kind of get
identify, yeah, you have
there
to have
with
had the
being
same
stoned,
experience, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Whereas I
yeah. I
think,
think I would agree with that because I'm coming at this as someone who actually has never been stoned, so I've
oh,
yeah,
never,
yeah,
ever,
yeah,
ever.
never ever ever.
Oh,
So
okay,
yeah,
right.
so but yeah, I think Cheech and Chong, they're almost, I think, more than. So I would say that in other stoner comedy, especially like the Seth Rogen, those types, like the more common ones, they sort of celebrate stoner culture, right?
Yes.
They're sort of like, yes, and they're expecting people to watch it who have had similar experiences and can kind
Yeah,
of
yeah. And
identify.
there's a
So
slight meta kind of element to
yeah,
it.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas I find that Cheech and Chong, which is why I've always kind of considered that, what you said is that it's possible that they're really not really stoners in real life, which is that they're more making fun of stoners or stoner culture, or they're parodying the culture rather than uh sort of experiencing or allowing it, because it's more of an exaggeration of stoner culture than the rest of it. You know what I mean? The
Yeah,
more
yeah.
common one is more of like a realistic well, not really like Pineapple Express, maybe not, but it's sort of like a we're stoners and we're doing things about stoning.
Yeah, I know what you
Whereas
mean. Like a lot of
yeah,
stoner
then
comedy.
they
Yeah.
have almost, it's a more of a parodical
Yeah, it
idea.
would be people like, yeah, struggling to do very basic things and it being very kind of room based or conversation based or kind of
Right.
mirroring the stoner experience. Yes, whereas in this film there's fucking car chases and shit and stuff that
Yeah.
real stoners would never get it together to do.
Exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and yeah,
And
but you're quite right. I think Pineapple Express is probably. I didn't like Pineapple Express, but I think the idea there was they were trying to go for a similar thing, right? Also
right.
parodying action movies and stuff, but like the
Mm,
ridiculousness of stoners actually doing that stuff.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah. Yeah. So yes, so again, Cheech and Chong and of course Stacy Keach as sort of like the cop hot on the trail of these guys. And
Quite funny.
um
I quite like Stacy Keach in this. He's quite amusing. I quite like
I
him.
was wondering if you misremembered because you had said that he was like barely in this
Yes,
movie,
I
but
did misremember. For some
yeah.
reason, I thought, and I might even be thinking of a different Cheech and Chong film. I thought of I had a memory of Stacy Keach as one of those motorcycle chips cops.
Oh, I
He
see. Okay.
might actually, I know he does return in another
Is
Cheech and
he?
Chong film.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
So I might have been thinking of that one. So yeah, I told you, oh, he's only in the film for 5 minutes. I was wrong about that. He is actually
Yeah,
in quite a bit.
he's
Yeah.
basically the main antagonist of the film, right? So and so he's the kind of the detective kind of hot on the trail of these kind of something. So there's some sort of kind of unnecessary, like kind of convoluted plot about something about like some company turning weed into actual like
Like
objects,
liquid weed, and then yeah,
liquid weed
I suppose it's a
and
bit like
objects, and making a car out of weed so that they can kind
yeah,
of transport it or get it like a sort of smuggle it easier and things like that. So and then they kind of get caught up, and it's just like a comedy of errors where they get caught up and end up driving this sort of car made of weed. And and there's and so he's hot on the trail, and then they blame some carved nuns at some point, and
mm,
stuff like that. So but for the most part, I got the impression that it's I mean, I was vaguely familiar with some of their like comedy albums and
uh,
some of the more famous stuff, like Dave's Not Home, that kind of stuff, right?
right.
Yeah, like so and they do that actual joke a
Yes,
little bit in this one, right? So I got the impression that it was almost sort of like a greatest hits
I
of
think
their
so.
kind
Yeah,
of jokes that they kind of threaded together into a kind of a loose narrative,
yeah. It's
which
extremely episodic, isn't it? Which I
yeah,
suppose you could
it's
argue a stoner comedy is supposed to be, right?
exactly right. So I think it
Culminates
worked
at
in that
the
way.
Battle of the Bands, right?
Yeah,
It's kind
exactly.
of
Yeah.
interesting because it's 78 LA, so it's like you see all these really quite rubbish kind of punk bands. Like one's kind of trying to sound a bit Buzzcocks, another one there's like a New York Dolls thing going on,
Mm.
and none of them are very good. But apparently some of the Dills are there, the Whores, and there's some other fake names. I enjoyed reading the Fags, the Puke, Fallopian Tubes. I think they might be a genuine punk band. Apparently, the Germs were supposed to be in, which would
Oh,
have been
really?
an amazing kind of record for for punk historians because there's very
Mm.
little Germs material around, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
but apparently they fucked up the audition or something, like they started some kind of food fight or something, so they got
yeah.
chucked off the set. Uh,
Yeah,
it's interesting. I was wondering if that Battle of the Bands, how staged it was, or how much of a real Battle of the Bands they kind of filmed. So I'm not quite sure, right? But it was kind of
sure.
interesting little snapshot of kind of I don't know LA late 70s kind of
Yeah.
so-called punk
Mm.
scene, but they still seem quite. A lot of them seem like hippies trying to learn how to be punks or something.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And apparently,
Um,
a young Ellen Barkin can be seen strumming
oh,
a
really?
guitar.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So Joey, about this movie, I kind of went in. I mean, I knew, of course, I know Cheech and Chong. I'd seen this, many, many years ago when I was a kid and stuff like that, and I knew most of their reputations and their kind of comedy. And generally, I went in a little trepidatious just because I thought it was at least worth doing on this podcast. We should at least do a Cheech and Chong movie at some point, right? But generally speaking, I find not being a stoner myself and not even having experienced it, especially the new ones like the Seth Rogen ones and stuff like that, I find them just sort of a little hard to enter because I don't have that experience that they're expecting from the audience, right? And I find that also stoner jokes kind of tend to kind of be almost one note. There's not a lot of ways you can
Yeah,
go with humor jokes, right? There, and Cheech and Chong basically invented those kinds of jokes, and then everything after that is almost like a replay or
yeah.
a variation of this
Stoner
thing. There's
stoner
not so much you
comedy
can do
is
with it.
very notoriously difficult to get right, right? Because
Right.
the thing with stoner comedy is like, yeah, like you said, if you're not stoned or you don't have the experience, you can't necessarily relate to it. Plus, even
Mhm.
if you can, it's really difficult to replicate what's funny when you're stoned.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then, on the other hand, if you're stoned, then things
Everything's
are
funny.
funny anyway. Exactly. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and
So
films, a lot of like the great stoner films that, as in films that like people like to watch when they're high, weren't designed for stoners, right? So
huh.
like if you try, it's like a cult thing. If you try and be a cult thing, you're not going to have a cult, right? It doesn't
Sure.
work.
Yeah. Right.
So it seems almost like I don't know why people bother trying to make a stoner comic because it almost seems like it has no utility. It's like your fucking
Mhm.
appendix or something, right? It's like
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. So that's what I mean is that I think that Cheech and Chong did it better than the Judd Apatow kind of crew
oh
because
yeah,
they make fun of stoner culture rather than expecting you to be part of it, expecting the audience to be part of it, right? So because yeah, you're actually right because there's no purpose. Like you're either not a stoner watching it or you're a stoner but not stoned when you're watching it, so it doesn't really or
yeah.
or you're already stoned, in which case everything's funny anyway, so it doesn't matter, right? So right, so
In
yeah.
my stoner years, not once I go. Well, no, I think we did try it, but never did we say, "Oh, it would be really great to watch a Cheech and Chong film now."
Mm.
Because, well, number one, apart from this, all the other ones, if memory serves correctly, are fucking rubbish. Like this
Yeah,
is the only good Cheech
yeah.
and Chong.
Well, I think they're just recycling the same jokes. That's the
Yeah,
problem with the stoner comedy genre, which is that there's not a lot of jokes there, right? It's
yeah,
pretty much
yeah.
two or three jokes that they're just recycled over and over again,
And
right?
yeah,
So
how many times do people have the munchies in this film? Like,
yeah, yeah, just munchy, yeah. And even this movie, they started to recycle
yeah,
the
that's
same
right.
jokes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So
Yeah, right.
like,
So
and even
yeah,
this time watching it, I must say I didn't find it gut-bustingly funny. I wasn't like, ah, that was fucking
right.
hilarious. I found it like I generally had a, I was, I had a okay time watching it, and I had a
Right.
good nature towards it, and I was like, ah, that was vaguely amusing. But I certainly wasn't rolling around with
No,
that.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I kind of the same thing that is that I was watching and there was a couple like I was actually sort of impressed that there was a couple pretty decent jokes in there, but they weren't necessarily the stoner jokes. They were
No,
just
no,
proper jokes that they happened to run in there. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is actually not as bad as I was expecting because I was expecting to be kind of like meh because I don't really think that stuff is that funny most of the time,
right.
right? But proper, I think this again elevates it because it actually had some proper comedy as well as the
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
recycled jokes. But yeah, so good on them. So
Yeah,
mhm.
I think it's a sad reflection on the state of the stoner comedy. Really, is
Sure,
to
yeah,
say that this vaguely amusing film is still the best
the
stoner
best of them.
comedy
Yes,
that's ever been made.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah. So again, there's not a lot you. It's funny that it's become a whole genre, and that really it's like they've taken a joke and make a whole genre of movies out of one joke, right? So yeah. Anyway, but yeah. So I I have to say that I had generally favorable feelings
Yeah,
toward the
same here.
movie,
Yeah,
despite the fact that yeah, again, it wasn't a perfect movie and it was a little bit meandering, a little bit like and some at times like could have cut all this part out. It doesn't really need to be there, right? But
then
yeah,
again, you just not do it at all, right?
not
That's
doing it at all. Exactly. Yeah. So, but I'm glad I was able to revisit at least once. And Stacy Keach, I thought was pretty funny.
yeah, yeah. I think
He committed to it. He was fun. Yeah. So,
across these two films, I really reiterated how much I like. Stacy Keach is definitely he's one of our dudes. Right? There's something about him.
yeah.
He's like,
Right.
right, me and Ron are off to
Right.
turn
We're off.
some bong water brown now. So yeah, later, dudes.
There, dude. Ron's not here.